What is the difference between a mediocre villain and a very good one? What is the difference between a villain that doesn't leave our minds years after we finish the game and a villain that is forgettable? Why is it that Raphael still lingers in our minds and we still think about the devilish charm that he presented many times and he's being treated as royalty, while the main villain, the Elder Brain, seems to not be as talked about and is a lot more forgettable? Is it that magnificent theme with the Shakespearean verses and the orchestra, or is there something more to him than that? Today, we're going to dive into the subject of Raphael, the devil that we love to hate or hate to love so much, and what makes him better than the Elder Brain. We are introduced to Raphael early on, and his charm and skill with words instantly grabs our attention even though he isn't presented as much of a threat. He introduces himself as a possible ally, or at the very least, an aid in the little tadpole problem that the main party is finding themselves in. He is willing to help and even shows us a little hospitality. He doesn't try to come off as combative, abrasive, or in any way as some sort of a possible threat. If you choose your words carefully and weigh your options, you can even get some resources from him in the form of camp supplies. Everything is set such that the main characters are at ease, relaxed, and willing to talk. Obviously, all of this is contrasted by the fact that he is a devil after all and he does not hide that. But even that action in itself serves him, since being truthfully usually involves some degree of vulnerability. You could say that him showing us his true face or nature could be an asset for him that was lost the second he showed us his true colors. In contrast, the Elder Brain is not even directly introduced to us until much later on in Act 2. Sure, we know of some sort of higher power that draws in all those troops together, and it seems to involve some kind of conspiracy, but in Act 1 we are only introduced to lower tier lieutenants and very vaguely presented with the Chosen, which does not really help us understand the power structure better in any way. Compared to Raphael, this unknown entity is not shown to us directly, is mysterious and ambiguous and very secretive, but this is exactly part of the problem. I've seen many stories that feature villains that are supposedly the big brain behind everything, but they were so good at hiding their tracks and so mysterious that players never actually got to be invested in their story or character. Personally, by the time I got to Act 3 and understood most of the power dynamic between the Chosen and the Elder Brain, I had lost some of the interest simply because the whole idea of a villain that had everything planned and supposedly had everything under control, but with very little screen time, is just not something that is very appealing. I had seen this type of delivery of villains before, from Zoval in World of Warcraft, to even characters from other mediums like Aizen from Bleach. I mean, hell, you could even throw in there the reverse Flash meme at this point, and it would still fit the mold.
Remember when you were making out with your first girlfriend, and you came right as she touched your leg? It was me, Barry. I jerked you off at super speed so it'd seem like you nutted at just a woman's touch!
Coming back to more serious matters, I understand that the whole idea of the Elder Brain and Elitids in general is basically alien invaders that have a mind so different than ours that we simply cannot comprehend their operating and thinking patterns, and that is very well established within the universe of D&D and even within the game itself. Throughout the game, we find multiple books that teach us about how to detect Elitids, how to fight Elitids, how to protect yourself against Elitids, so on and so forth. But there is still one important aspect that I feel like writers sometimes forget. No matter what story you craft, no matter what villain you want to portray, at the end of the day, your creation will still be filtered by our human minds. You need to present the story, the character, villains in such a way that the mere mortal mind will still be able to interact with it at some level. You can create a villain that supposedly calculated every possibility in the entire universe and decided to manipulate the main characters such that they arrive at a specific conclusion. But the delivery of all of those story plot points need to be presented to the audience, and the villain itself still needs some amount of screen time. Otherwise, you get a joke of a villain that spent all that energy plotting and manipulating only to have its plans foiled by some dudes using the power of friendship. How many of you reached Act 3 and finally got to meet the Elder Brain in that scene towards the end of the game? The Elder Brain, now evolved into a Nether Brain, tells you that actually it predicted your every move and it knew all along that you were going to bring the artifact to it. How many of you were thinking that that whole scene felt a bit forced or maybe a bit cheap? And again, I understand that the whole idea of these elitids is to be alien to us and that their very big brains are so much more powerful than our brains. But at the end of the day, this game is an entertainment medium and the audience needs to be part of the journey and understand some of the ways some characters are operating. Some of you might disagree with me and you are free to do so. But let me ask you then, why is Raphael a lot more popular than the Nether Brain? Simply ask yourself this question and answer truthfully. Maybe I'm missing something, who knows? Let me know in the comments if you think I'm completely wrong and I missed the point. Personally, I would still say that the whole scene fell flat and cheap, because we as people need to get attached to these characters to some degree. You either need to make the audience hate a character, love a character, or somewhere in between. One of the worst things you can do to your characters in a story is to make the audience feel nothing towards them. No hate, no love, no opinion. This is bad because it means people simply do not care about that character. I am no psychologist, but I don't think you need a degree in psychology or neuroscience to understand that if you want your story to succeed and appeal to people, you have to deliver certain moments of growth to your characters, and that includes even your villains. You need to make the audience think and have the characters in their minds at all times, otherwise you lose the interest of people. Without exposition, delivery, and screen time, the audience might start to feel like they're being either misled or lied to. It could start to feel like those TV show tropes where there's always a bigger fish, there's always someone else that pulls the strings from the shadows. But without enough context, all of those masterminds will fall flat and feel like opportunists at best or cheap writing at worst. And I'm not saying that the overall writing in BG3 is cheap, obviously the game is very well structured, but it has its weak points, and I'm only trying to make the case that this might be one of those weaker points. Again, we can come back to Raphael and try to understand what makes him so popular. Sure, he has his charm, sure, he has an entire song dedicated to him that is sung by himself, which is extremely badass, of course. But even more than that, if we look deeper than all of the gravitas, all the rhymes, all of that wordplay, we can see that he was actually developed over multiple scenes and multiple acts, and he is being built to be this potentially important character. Even the fact that we can completely ignore him in Act 3 and never even visit his House of Hope adds more to him, because then if you play a second playthrough and uncover all he has to offer, you begin to understand that he was always there, always watching, observing, and biding his time for the perfect moment to strike a deal. Raphael to me seemed a bit similar to how Gunther Odim was presented in The Witcher 3. Players meet this meek, inconspicuous character in the very beginning of the game, offers Geralt some help, drops some vague line about maybe one day returning the favor, and disappears. That is how you lay out the groundwork. You drop hints here and there, you attempt to get the audience's attention through some clever quippy writing, and then you let them wander and digest what just happened. Of course, there's multiple ways to introduce and develop a character, and I'm not saying the only way to do it correctly is the way I just described, but if you want to stir intrigue and interest in our minds, you, as a writer, need to still deliver the story in a way that is digestible. The Elder Brain as an enemy felt less important until the very last part of the game, and one of the reasons some of us might have felt that is because the pacing was a bit off. It felt as though too much time was passing between every new bit of information we gained through playing the main story. I can only speculate, but it felt to me as though the Elder Brain was meant to be this big plot twist at the end that supposedly would make us question everything we did until that point. Even the Emperor has a couple of lines indicating that, but for some reason that twist didn't feel as impactful. We know by now that the end of BG3 was rushed a bit, so this could have contributed to the overall pace and delivery of the last act of the game. But unfortunately, I don't think that this is the only reason. If I were to quantify and analyze The issue of the Elder Brain, I would say that sadly it is a perfect storm of multiple factors that work against it. The lack of interaction across all three acts, the pacing that was a bit off, the overall lack of personality on the Elder Brain's part, and of course the delivery. I believe the Nether Brain could have been a better villain if it had a bit more screen time. And the thing that is a bit odd to me is the fact that the overall structure of the story is already good, and most of the NetherBrain's impact on the various characters such as Gortash, Orin, or the Dark Urge is described in the game already. If you take some time to explore Gortash's chambers after you kill him, you can uncover some very important plot points. Or even earlier, if you find his parents' house and uncover his journals, we learn that Gortash and the Dark Urge are the ones that came up with the idea to enslave the Elder Brain by using the power of the Crown of Karsus. But the game is quite vague on how exactly does the party of Dark Urge and Gortash get the knowledge about the Mind Flayer colony, where to find it, and even about its existence. If you interact with the cracked wall in Act 2, Moonrise Towers, as the Dark Urge, you get a special cinematic where you find out that the Chosen of Baal is the Kingmaker, which implies that the Dark Urge is the one that placed the Crown of Karsus on the Elder Brain. But again, this happens after they had already found out about the existence of the Mind Flayer colony, and this is the crux of the problem. We don't have a clear indicator as to who told Gortash or the Dark Urge about the location, which then started the whole sequence of them devising the plan to enslave the world through the Elder Brain. Maybe Larian was intentionally vague about this aspect in order to let us try and speculate and put the pieces together. But like I mentioned before, this delivery is often weak, and if not handled properly, people can lose the suspension of disbelief. So it seems a bit odd as to why didn't Larian want to shine a bigger spotlight on their main villain and chose instead to go for the more underground option. Overall, BG3 is an incredible game, so it's safe to say they nailed many of the aspects of the game. But what do you think the cause of the way Larian handled the Elder Brain is? Do you think it was simply a matter of rushing the end game, or do you feel like they mishandled the end chapter altogether? One thing is for certain. I can probably speak for most of us when I say that none can compare to our favorite champion, ruler of Hell's wannabe, Raphael.